Hi everyone, this is Haitham from horsepowercalculators.net. Today we're going to be doing some simulations using the virtual dyno, comparing different intercooler setups. I'm going to start by loading one of our featured platforms here. Naturally 2008 naturally aspirated Subaru. I'm going to load this platform. We're going to turbocharge it, and then we're going to modify it with different intercoolers. One thing to note, some of these profiles aren't 100% correct. Let's look here. Peak power red line is 0, shouldn't be 0. Should be probably somewhere around 170 horsepower. I'm going to correct a few things here. Actually, I'm going to show you a baseline run before correcting these numbers. And then we're going to see what happens after I fix the numbers and show you the dyno working. Here's my stock engine. It's 4 cylinders, 2.5 liter. This is the bore, the stroke, the compression ratio. We're going to move ahead to the power adders. In stock form, it's naturally aspirated. We're going to modify it, so it's going to be a turbocharged engine. We're going to run around 12 pounds of boost, probably spooling around 3,500. And I'm going to choose a turbocharger. I already went through this example a few minutes ago, so I'm going to choose a TDO4 18T, which has about 62% efficiency at peak power and 55% efficiency at peak torque. So I'm going to close this, I'm going to click back, I'm going to put in 55% at peak torque, 62% power. I'm going to do my first simulation without an intercooler. Click next. Now you see here there's some problems with this profile. It says the plenum volume is 0 cc. That's incorrect. And there's another problem here with this profile. It says the header pipe diameter is a quarter. It's about a half an inch, less than a half an inch, which is also incorrect. So what's going to happen here is when I try to run this first simulation, I'm going to get, my first run is 170 horsepower, my new run is 7 horsepower. So there's something going on that's incorrect with the virtual dyno. And sometimes I get emails from people telling me, oh, your dyno doesn't work, and I get 1-star ratings on iTunes and people are upset. They say it doesn't work. How can it be 7 horsepower? Well, if you just click the I button here, look for the information, platform information, and you look at some obvious numbers like the ideal plenum volume calculated by the dyno should be around 1,800 cc for this 2.5 liter engine, and your real volume is around 0. So there's something fishy going on here. Also look at our header pipe diameter. The ideal header pipe is 1 3/4 inch, and the actual header pipe is less than half an inch, so there's something fishy with these numbers here. If we look at the Catback exhaust, the dyno says it should be a 2-inch Catback, and we have a 1.8-inch Catback, so that's reasonable. Numbers that are reasonable will show you parts that are probably choking your horsepower, but numbers that are much smaller than the ideal numbers will tell you that there's something wrong with the simulation, and that might be the problem why you're not getting any results. So I'm going to go back and fix this profile. So let's say it has conservative 1.2-inch runner, and I'm going to do the same for my stock setup. So stock and modified, this is the real number that should have been in here. Then I'm going to go back all the way to my intake manifold, and we're going to put in something like 1500 cc's. It's a small number, but it's not 0. Zeros don't work well when you're doing calculations like this, because if you throw in 0 intake pipe diameter, it can't be a half-inch intake pipe. Maybe a 2-inch intake pipe, that's fine. 2.5 maybe. Just put in reasonable numbers. If you're not sure about any of these pages, just click on this reload button here. The calculator will give you numbers that make sense. 2.25-inch intake, 1800 cc plenum. And then you can copy this over to the modified setup. And since these are the same on the stock and the modified setup, they shouldn't affect our power runs. But as long as we have reasonable numbers in here, we're going to get some output from the dyno, and we can go ahead with our simulation. So let's see if I fixed our profile problems. what we have here. It looks like, yep, we fixed the profile. So stock form, we're producing about 170 horsepower, 12 pounds, no intercooler, 12 psi, no IC. We're producing 225 horsepower. I'm going to click refresh, and so that'll clear everything but the first and the last run. So the dyno is running, produced our first power run. This is not intercooled. One of the things we're going to look at here is my ideal intercooler. Ideal intercooler for 12 pounds of boost is 540 cubic inches. Okay. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to try 3 different intercooler setups for this car. I'm going to try a small top-mount intercooler from the WRX. I'm going to use a larger top-mount intercooler from the STI, and then I'm going to use a Perrin Intercooler, which is a front-mount setup. And we're going to see how power varies with those 3 setups. First thing I'm going to do here is take off the no intercooler. I'm going to put in the numbers for the top-mount. I'm just going to switch out of full screen mode, and I'm looking at my browser here. Let me show you the browser page. I'll just bring this in here so you can see the numbers as well. The smallest top-mount intercooler is a 16.5 by 6 by 3. And I know this is smaller than the ideal setup calculated by the virtual dyno, but it's better than not running an intercooler at all. So I'm going to run this as my first simulation. And we're going to see if we gain any horsepower. And there we go, we gained about 24 horsepower. So this is top-mount intercooler number 1. We gained about 24 horsepower with the intercooler, which is really cool. I'm going to go back, see what happens with a different intercooler setup. Going back to the forums here. The largest top-mount intercooler was the 2008 STI top-mount, and this is the confirmed size. It's almost 21 inches by 7 inches by 3, so it's much larger than 16 by 6 by 3. So we'll go here, 20.75 by 6. 20.75 by 6.85 inches by 3. Going to go back to our dyno. And there we see we've gained another 12 horsepower. Intercooler 2. We've gained another 12 horsepower by going to the larger top-mount intercooler. I'm going to click on my platform information here, and we'll see. Ideal intercooler dimensions are over here, 540 cubic inches, and our real intercooler dimensions are 426 cubic inches. So we can still gain more power by going to an even larger intercooler. That's what the dyno is saying there. See, it depends on your power level, it depends on your boost level. For lower boost setup, maybe 5 or 6 pounds, maybe the larger top-mount intercooler would have been adequate, but for our power goal, we're going to need something larger. So I'm going to use the Perrin Intercooler, and just for argument's sake, this is not an ad for Perrin or any other manufacturer. I'm just showing you dimensions for, this is a platform that I can find numbers for, so we're going to use this as a model. The Perrin Intercooler core is 28 inches by 9.25 by 3.5, so it's 906 cubic inches, which is much more than the 540 cubic inches we need for our setup. So this is good for this platform, and it's going to be okay if we increase the boost later on. So I'm going to go back here, see what this intercooler does for us. I forgot the numbers. 28 by 9.25 by 3.5. that's 28 and a quarter by 3.5. I'm going to click on next. Go back and see the results that I get here. And we've gained another 9 horsepower by going to the Perrin Intercooler. So this is our Perrin front mount. And there you see the difference. Let's just save this. And there you can see the difference between my first setup. Stock is 170 horsepower, not intercooled, 225. Front mount intercooled, 270. And so we've gained about 75 horsepower. Going from a non-intercooled setup to a front mount intercooled setup at the same power level. I'm going to do one last run and try to run a little more boost turbo style rear muffler, and I'm going to raise the boost up a little more, around 20 pounds of boost, which is ridiculous for our stock compression ratio. Actually, I'm going to go back. I'm going to lower my compression ratio. Let's say we rebuilt this engine with 8:1 pistons. So we're going to lose a little bit of power on the compression. We're going to gain the power on the boost. 18 pounds of boost. This was 3.5 inches. 6 Perrin Intercooler. So numbers changed. 9.25, 3.5, and 28. 9.25, 28. So there we go. Leave my cams alone, leave the exhaust alone, upgraded my Catback. Now we're producing over 438 horsepower. So this is 18 psi plus exhaust. So now the one thing I want to show you here, look at our information. Ideal intercooler setup for 18 pounds is about 600 cubic inches, and the real intercooler we have is 906 cubic inches. So this Perrin intercooler is capable of supporting much more than 430 horsepower. It's a really good setup, but it'll cost you, and here's how. I'm going to show you where it costs you going to a much larger intercooler than you need. If you look at here, our engine throttle response, the virtual dyno calculates the total intake length of your system and the average intake air velocity in the system, and so it can calculate your response time from when you hit the throttle, the amount of time it takes for a new surge of air to come in, travel through the entire intake path and reach your engine. As you can see, the stock setup, naturally aspirated, was only 18.3 milliseconds. The modified setup is 30 milliseconds, so it's about double the response time as stock. If you go to a much larger core than you need for your setup, you're going to keep increasing this throttle response time. You're going to reduce response, and you're not going to gain much horsepower. If we go back to our last run here, you can see that going from a really good top mount intercooler to a much larger front mount intercooler, you only gained 9 horsepower, whereas going from no intercooler to the top mount, we gained about 35 horsepower. So it's worth it to run an intercooler. It's just not really that much worth it to run a really massive intercooler. You gain a little bit of top end, you lose a little bit of response, and that's the trade-off. You have to try and find that balance of what's the right intercooler size for this setup that's going to maximize cooling and give me proper response, and that's where you want to set your goals. Just for argument's sake, I'm just going to look at our analysis page just to see if there's anything else here. I upgraded the exhaust, so you can see our Catback piping is pretty okay, our muffler's okay, our catalytic converters have a little bit of a loss. The header primary pipe that I set to 1.2 inches is still restrictive, so we can go with a larger primary pipe. Exhaust valve is okay. On the intake side, the intake valve and manifold, everything looks okay there too. We can try to reduce pressure drops by going to larger valves and optimizing the header primary pipe. We can make a little more power at the same boost level, and that's what these numbers are telling us here. Let's look at our cams. Our cams are good for our power range. We can actually use slightly less duration cams and make a slightly wider power band because these cams are optimized up to 9,000 RPMs, which is above the red line of this engine. And our header isn't tuned at all, which is okay. Most turbocharged engines aren't using tuned headers unless you're using a remote mounted turbo setup or you know, side mounted turbo. Alright, so that's it. If you want to keep a copy of this Dyno run, just click on the love button here. Just share it. Uploading a Dyno image. And then here you have an image that you can share and tweet. I'm just going to go ahead and share this Dyno run through Facebook. I'm going to share it on our Facebook page. I'm going to share this to Supercharger Performance. Intercooler comparisons using the virtual Dyno. How-to video. Let's see. Alright. I'm going to share the link. It should be shared to my... I'm going to open the Supercharger Performance page, which is our Facebook page. I'm just going to bring this over here, show you what I'm looking at. Here's Supercharger Performance page. Go ahead and hide the top part. Computer's a little slow because we're recording this video and doing some other stuff. And here you see, this is the Dyno run that I shared to Facebook. Oops. Here's the Dyno run that I shared to Facebook, and this is the link. Stock setup, 12 pounds, no intercooler, top mount intercooler 1, top mount intercooler 2, front mount intercooler, 18 pounds, and exhaust. And here are our Dyno runs that you can share. You can take this image and put it on the forums or give it to anybody else for comparison's sake. And that was it. That's how you use the virtual Dyno to compare different intercoolers. That's how you use the information button here to figure out if anything's wrong with your setup. If any of these numbers don't look correct, then that's probably why you're not getting a Dyno run completed. And so if you ever need to troubleshoot why the Dyno isn't working for you, just click on the information button, look through the numbers and see if you missed any numbers, if you missed a comma somewhere. Sometimes you want to put something in as 2 inches and you put it in as 2 millimeters. So 2 inches would be a nice intake size part. 2 millimeters would be very restrictive. It would create a large pressure drop and then you won't be able to produce any horsepower. These are kind of like the typical mistakes that people use, that people perform when they're using the Dyno, and then they complain that it doesn't work. It actually works. It works really well. It's an amazing piece of software. If you look here, here's our pressure ratio and our density ratio. Pressure ratio is 2.22, which is 18 pounds of boost. Density ratio comes from the efficiency of the turbocharger, the boost level, and the absolute intake air temp, because we have temperature corrections working in the Dyno, so it puts all that together and calculates the final turbocharger outlet temperatures compared to the turbocharger inlet temperature, and then based on that temperature it calculates the density ratio of the air going into the engine. And then that goes into the next stage, which is the intercooler stage, which is what we were simulating right here. Different sizes of intercoolers, different intercooler efficiencies being calculated based on the core size. And then based on that, how much cooling, how much drop in temperature, what the final density ratio is for the air. And based on that density ratio, what's the actual horsepower level being produced at every RPM point. Yeah, so this happens at every RPM point. So if you were using something like a centrifugal supercharger where you have a variable boost curve, the virtual dyno calculates the density ratio at every specific point in that boost curve for every pressure level, and then every intake temperature for every one of those boost levels. And then that all gets thrown into the virtual dyno, so you get a realistic curve, which is not just using peak numbers here. I hope that makes sense. If you're a little confused, or if I've gone through this a little rapidly, just go back. You can just go back and let me reduce this a little bit. You can just go back and run through the video again. You'll be able to get what I'm saying. Here's our information button. Just use it anytime. And if you need any help, if you're stuck at some point, just click on the help button. You can email me through here. Alright. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for purchasing the virtual dyno on Android or iPhone. Thank you for supporting Supercharger Performance, horsepowercalculators.net, and the virtual dyno. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you, and see you next time.